Thank you. Think back to jury selection, and we asked the same question of everybody here. And that was, if you're selected as a juror on this case, can you keep your word and follow the law? Remember that?
Yeah.
Can you keep your word and follow the law? Nothing matters more. If you had given us any indication that you couldn't do that, you wouldn't be here today. Nothing matters more. So that begs the question, well, what's the law? What's the law? Well, here it is. This is what the judge told you yesterday. And it's what is within the jury instructions that you're going to get back with you. So these are the elements of the two crimes that we have. So first, and it's very straightforward, Tanya Wise is dead. The death was caused by the criminal act of Jose Soto-Escalera. And there was a premeditated killing of Tanya Wise. So the period of time, and the law defines premeditation. Now I'm going to give you the full instruction here in a few minutes. But focus in on this. The period of time must be long enough to allow reflection by the defendant. And then there's going to be another question on the verdict form, which is, was a weapon used? Okay, very, very straightforward. Next, first-degree murder of an unborn child. Jose Soto-Escalera caused the death of the unborn child, Tanya Wise, by killing Tanya Wise. His killing of Tanya Wise was first-degree murder, and an unborn child is exactly what you would think. And so now we get into the evidence of the case, right? So anytime you're looking at a case like this, you're looking at some broad themes. The broad themes, number one, you want to look at motive, right? Never an element. Motive is never an element for any crime. However, it's highly relevant, right? Highly relevant evidence. Never a motive. Next, you have opportunity, right? Was there an opportunity for this defendant to commit these crimes? And next, and perhaps most significant, is intent, right? We've got to prove intent. One, that it was an intentional killing. And number two, that not only was it an intentional killing, but it was done with premeditation. And so when you look at all this evidence, you got to be sure to look at it through the lens of reasonable doubt and through the objective lens of the jury instruction, the law, right? We're not here to be swayed by our emotions. We use our brains that we have, and we view things through the law with critical analysis. So, and remember, the starting point is common sense, right? We never forget, we never throw out our common sense here in the middle of a jury trial. And the starting point is this. People who have nothing to hide have no reason to lie, right? People who have nothing to hide have no reason to lie. Remember, as the jury in the case, you are the fact finders. You are the fact finders. You figure out what evidence is credible and what is not. Who told the truth and who didn't. Only you can answer that. Only you can answer that. Who told the truth? So first, we start with this. Here we are, Jose Soto-Escalera. He's sitting there, August 25th, 2018, and he's being interviewed by Detective Newman and Detective Cannon. And this is what he says.
Listen, she fucking so many dudes that she talked to, and God knows what she did.
What do you mean?
No, I'm saying because she knows a lot of guys, so I don't know. Like, God knows what she's done. I don't know. I'm just saying.
You ever been with her? No? Never had sex with her?
No. And to God.
Okay. That was his statement two days after the homicide of Tanya Wise and her unborn child, right? Here he is. He's talking to Detective Newman, and that's what he says. I've never had sex with Tanya Wise. Way in the evidence instruction. We all talked about it in jury selection. How do we figure out who's telling the truth and who's not? Here it is, right here. One of the questions, Does the witness's testimony agree with the other testimony and other evidence in the case? In other words, was it confirmed and corroborated, meaning that it's truthful? Or is there evidence that contradicts it, meaning that it's false? Well, remember what Wayne Walker testified to. He testified that the probability of Jose Soto-Escalera being the parent of the unborn child Josiah is 99.9999999%. Right? So right there, we have him, the defendant, flatly contradicted by the DNA evidence in the case. So we have him lying. Okay? But to be clear, that doesn't make him a murderer. Right? That doesn't make him a murderer. He's lying, but that doesn't make him a murderer. But he's lying in the middle of a criminal investigation. He's lying in the middle of a criminal investigation. So what else do we have? What else suggests that this defendant had the motive to kill Tanya and her unborn child? Well, as you recall, we have the defendant's statements all the way back to August 21st of 2018. Norma Campos from the FBI testified to this. Remember, the crime happens on August 23rd, 2018. So here we are, 2 days later, session 3 of 39, and here's the defendant talking to Eric Alvarado, his nephew, and what does he say? She's pregnant from that little a-hole that works there. She says it's mine, supposedly. I can't take any chances. I can't take any chances. I lose everything. I'm going to blow her brains out so she doesn't talk. I have to do it, Eric. I have no other choice. I am going to lose everything. If there's some concern about who's saying what during these videos, well, we know who said it. There's only 2 guys in the truck. I have to do it. Eric, this comes directly from the words of that defendant. Jose Soto-Escalera comes directly from his mouth. I'm going to lose everything. And then he goes on. If my wife found something like that out, oh my God, bro, I lose everything, bro. I lose everything. Remember, as we discussed in jury selection, our lives are a reflection of our choices, right? Our lives are a reflection of our choices. He chose to do this. He chose to do these crimes. On August 21st, 2018, you see the genesis of this plan. He chose to do these crimes. Had he simply been accountable, would we even be here today? So we know he has a motive. We know he has the motive now because it comes directly from the horse's mouth. Did he have an opportunity to commit these crimes? Did he have an opportunity to commit these crimes? Okay, so because somebody can have a motive to kill somebody, but again, that doesn't make him a murderer, right? So we got to look next to whether he had an opportunity. So then we have Agent Kelly D.P. Trantonio from the FBI, and she comes in and she testified, and she said, listen, I took the cell phone data from both of the phones of the defendant and the phone of the victim that she was using at the time. So we have the defendant right here. This is his home on Southwest Cactus, and at 8:11, we have him right there. Okay, well, that makes sense. I mean, he's at his own house, right? So the question is, remember, what's corroborated and what's not, right? So the question is, how do we know that the FBI agent was accurate? Or how do we know that her testimony was accurate? Well, if you recall, yesterday we called 2 witnesses that were very, very quick, right? 2 witnesses very, very quick. We had a witness who was a neighbor of the defendant and a witness who was a neighbor of the victim, right? and they came in, they were maybe 5 or 10 minutes long each. And you got to think, man, geez, that was quick testimony. Maybe it wasn't that important. Well, it turns out it was incredibly important. Why do I say that? Because what they said in the videos that they were able to produce confirms and corroborates Kelly's analysis. Why do I say that? Well, because here we are on Southwest Cactus, next door neighbor, we see a truck leaving at 8:11, which is within the time frame that Kelly was able to find, right? She was able to find these times and these geolocations at that time in her analysis. Well, why is that important? Because take a close look at this truck, and what do you see there? You see a fog light, right? Keep that fog light in the back of your mind. Keep that. I want to return to that fog light, but we can clearly see a fog light right there. Just file that away for a second. And then we go up to Tanya's home, right? And here we are at Tanya's home, and Elizabeth Bedolla, the mother of Tanya, the grandmother-to-be of Josiah, and what does she say? She's the last person to see Tanya alive. She says around 8 p.m. or maybe shortly thereafter, right? So she's the last person to see Tanya alive. Important witness. And what does she say? Remember, Agent Kelly's testimony, 2 phone calls were made that provided sufficient data for the phone's geolocation to be determined in a more precise manner, right? Because in 2018, we have this cell phone data. It's not what it is today. Can it give it puts us in the ballpark. It's not 100% accurate. Nothing is. But we do have very good data. And at 8:25, who is talking to Tanya Wise? That would be a good question. Who is the victim talking to? Who is the victim talking to shortly before her death? Who is she with? The defendant. Right? The defendant. He makes these 2 phone calls, or actually one to him and one from her at 8:25. At 8:25, and that puts the defendant at her house. So he's calling her. Not only is he calling her, but he's right there at her home. He's right there at her home, right? And the question that I would have is, wait a second, if this defendant had nothing to do with these murders, right? If he had nothing to do with these murders, then why is he at her home? And why is he making phone calls to her right after Elizabeth Bedolla saw her leave that house? And so again, wait a second, but we need corroboration, right? We need corroboration. How do we know that Agent Kelly is right about this? How do we know that this is accurate or not? Well, I'll tell you why. Because the neighbor of Tanya, we pulled her in. And guess what? Surveillance video from their house. What does it show? At 8:26, we see a truck leaving Larchmont Lane. Right there. Right there. So now, not only are we confirmed and not only does the phone data show us that these people are together, having spoken to each other and having been at the right places, but the video surveillance data flatly confirms and corroborates the video surveillance flatly confirms and corroborates the phone data. So we know that they were together at the time, and we know that that truck, the defendant's truck, was used in this crime. Not anybody else's, the defendant's truck. How do I know that? How do we know that? What other evidence confirms and corroborates that the defendant's truck and no one else's was used in this crime? Here's one. Do you remember William Muller? Right? And it's easy to get caught up in this case because the state, we've provided multiple expert witnesses. We've had DNA folks. We've had translators. We've had a guy that did tire impressions. All this lengthy testimony, and it's easy to overlook somebody who takes the stand for 15 minutes, right? He was on there for 15 minutes day one. And it's easy to overlook somebody like that. But man, his testimony was incredibly important. Why do I say that? Because what is William Mullen doing? He lives in Vero and he's driving home. He's driving back and forth from home and work on the night of the homicide, right? August 23rd, 2018, late at night, he sees a silver full-size truck. His testimony was he sees a silver full-size truck on Russos Road, which is your crime scene. Right? He has no idea who these people are, but he sees that truck. And what does he see? It caught his attention because the truck turned on its fog lights, and he thought it was odd. That's what he testified. He just thought it was odd. He turns on these fog lights, right? And he just thought it was odd. And so he makes a mental note of it, right? He makes a mental note of it. The truck, he sees the truck, drives slowly off, and then he goes home. And what does he say? When he returns the next day, he's on the same route. He drives by and he sees a crime. He sees all kinds of sheriff's officers, sheriff's deputies, and a crime scene unit. And he comes to them and he says, "Hey, I don't know if this is important or not, but this is what I saw. I saw a silver truck, and it was odd because it turned its fog lights on." Okay. Somebody who doesn't know anybody. He's a completely independent witness, and he's simply telling you what he saw, right? First question, do you have any reason to doubt that testimony? Is there any reason to disbelieve William Mullen? And the next question is, he also remembered he had a chrome wheel, so he was right on that. The next question is, how do we know that it's the same Dodge Ram? Well, here's the defendant's truck as it was being searched at a search warrant. Here's a truck that leaves the defendant's home at 8:11 p.m. that night. We see fog lights that match. We see that it was a four-door truck that matches, and we can also see the chrome on the wheels. William Mullen was right. William Mullen was right on the money. William Mullen is confirmed and corroborated every which way to Sunday. He was absolutely right. So now we know that the defendant not only had a motive, now we know that he had the opportunity. In part 3, now we know that his vehicle was involved in this crime. Well, how do we know that? Remember, both of the phones are together near the crime scene based on the data from Agent Kelly. What's happening here? Both of these phones are moving together first, which is significant. They're both together, and they're both moving north from Tanya's residence to the crime scene of Johnson and Russo's. Significantly, the defendant's statement on August 25th, 2018 to Detective Newman was what? They asked him, do you remember what he said? He said, "Oh no, I wasn't up there. I was off Selvets Road in Port St. Lucie." Right? I was off Selvets Road in Port St. Lucie when this went down. And we know that just like his story about not having sex with Tanya, just like his story, we know that that's flatly refuted by the objective phone data in this case. So now we're up to 2 significant lies. He lied about his motive, and he lied about opportunity. Now we start taking a very, very close look at Jose Soto-Escalera as the person who murdered a pregnant woman. Why would the defendant lie about his location on the night of a double murder? If he had nothing to do with this, if he had nothing to do with these crimes, why is he lying about this? Right? Why is he lying about this? And then the next question is, well, wait a second, okay, let's say you're very cynical and you say, okay, wait a second, I need some scientific evidence to back this up, all right? I mean, I need some scientific evidence. Is there any scientific evidence that implicates this defendant? Of course there is. Of course there is. What do we have? August 31st, 2018. They go and they swab the front passenger side headrest of the silver Dodge Ram. And what do they find? What do they find on the front passenger side headrest of the defendant's silver truck? Tanya Wise's DNA. Okay. Tanya Wise's DNA. What else do we find? If he had nothing to do with these crimes, if he's innocent, what's her blood doing in his car? What else do we find? Okay, here we go. Exhibit 29, a section of carpet. They took that out on September 24th. The major contributor, Tanya Wise. Tanya Wise. So now not only do we know, now we've established motive, now we've established opportunity, and now we've established that this truck was involved in the crime. Tanya was not strangled, right? Tanya was the victim of a brutal murder, whereas Dr. O'Neill testified a substantial loss of blood was a result of a crush injury to her head and a sharp force injury to her neck, 2 sharp force injuries. There would have been a significant amount of blood, and some of it ended up in his vehicle. Okay, so now let's take a look at intent, right? So now we have motive, we have opportunity. Now let's take a look at intent. Did he intend to kill her? And then if the answer to that is yes, was this a premeditated killing? So again, here is what the judge is going to tell you, or already told you, I'm sorry. This is the full and complete definition of premeditation. It's killing after consciously deciding to do so. The decision must be present in the mind at the time of the killing. The law does not fix the exact period of time that must pass between. There must be enough time to allow reflection by the defendant. And think back to jury selection. We had all talked about the stoplight, right? And we had all agreed, yeah, during that, when your foot goes from the in that no man's land, and you make the call as to whether or not you're going to push the brake or whether or not you're going to push the accelerator and go through and see if you can beat the stoplight, that's a premeditated act. You are making a deliberate, conscious choice. Remember, it's a choice that we make. We make thousands of them every day, some good, some bad. That's a choice that we make. And this choice is done with premeditation. So we don't have, in this case, we don't have seconds worth of premeditation. We have days worth of premeditation. Remember the testimony from the FBI translator, from both translators. We have days worth of testimony. And let's not forget Kenneth Barron. Kenneth Barron, if you recall, he was another one of those witnesses that was about 15 minutes long, right? And Kenneth Barron is working at Waste Pro, and he's a garbage truck driver along with this defendant. And he had known him for years, and Kenneth Barron's testimony was interesting. Because what does he say? He says, listen, that defendant, who I've known for years, approached me 2 to 4 weeks prior to these murders. Not 2 to 4 days, not 2 to 4 hours, 2 to 4 weeks prior to these murders. And he starts asking him about a ghost gun, right? He's asking about a ghost gun. He wants an unprovable or untraceable gun. And you got to stop and ask yourself, why would anybody want such a thing, right? What's the point of having a gun that cannot be traced back to you, right? Why would he discuss this? Okay, there could be many reasons. I'll concede that. There could be many reasons. He could just be running his mouth. but it could have some nefarious intent. But let's just keep that. It's a piece of the puzzle. Is it going to carry the day? No, it's not going to carry the day. But it's a piece of the puzzle. It gives you some insight into this defendant's mind in the weeks leading up to the murder of a pregnant woman. That's what it does. So let's take a look. Let's take a look at the words of the defendant himself. All right? Let's take a look at what he said. At what he said that he was going to do. What he said that he had done. The starting point is Norma Campos and Rose Rosario. Norma has worked with the FBI for many, many years. Rose Rosario has done the same thing in a private capacity. So both of these folks are highly experienced, and they spent a considerable amount of time making sure that the translations that they gave to you in court were accurate. Right? That's what their job is. They wanted to make sure it was accurate. I think Norma said she spent, I want to say 57 hours or something along those lines, 51, a significant amount of time. I think Rose said hers was over 100. Okay? So these people have spent a whole lot of time making sure that they're putting out a good work product. So the question is, do you believe it? Do you believe it? Have you been given any evidence or any legitimate reason to doubt what they told you? No. Right? No. So then we turn to that. We turn to August 21st. So here we are, 2 days before the homicide, right? 2 days before the homicide, and we see the defendant start to develop this plan, right? He starts to develop this plan. And here we are in session 3. I've already prepared her well. I told her that there are some people that want to pay her because then it goes unintelligible. And she asked me, will you go with me because I don't know them? I told her, yeah, I'll go. Throw me a couple of bucks my way. So he's organizing, he's convincing her to do this, what we can only surmise is some kind of a sexual encounter with strange men. I mean, that's what it is. And he says, you know what I'm saying? I have to find a spot and dump her there. You know what I'm saying? She has threatened another guy. The guy is giving her money. That V is nasty. She plays like a man, right? So here we are. He's concocting this plan to lure Tanya by creating this circumstance where she can obtain some money. Where did he take her? Do you recall? Where did he take her? He takes her to an isolated location on the defendant's trash route. He didn't kill her in the middle of Port St. Lucie. He didn't find a place where there are a bunch of witnesses. He made sure that there would be no cameras. He took her out to a desolate area late at night where he knew no one would be around. And that's where he killed her. And he got her there by that plan. He was able to execute that plan. And then he continues on in session 4. He's talking about the planning. He says to Alvarado, you can't prove anything if no one saw it. I was thinking of taking her to some field nearby the route, meaning the trash route. Right? I was thinking of taking her to some field near the trash route. Do you know where I go? When she go in there, she disappear for a couple of days. She does that. She disappears for 2 or 3 days. She always does that. And I'll take her phone and I'll throw it away, and I'll throw it away or I'll burn it. They can't do anything there. I have everything planned out. Ladies and gentlemen, is that a sufficient time to allow for reflection? This is not some spur-of-the-moment killing. This is not a bar fight that got out of control. This was a carefully orchestrated plan to execute a pregnant woman. Why? Because he didn't want his wife to find out that she had impregnated her. This is the very definition of premeditation. The day of the homicide, August 23rd, 2018, Session 17 of 39. What does he say? It gets worse. The shit is over now. Now I have the location. So he's settled on the location. He knows it's going to be on his trash route, an area that he's familiar with, right? An area that he's familiar with. We put her in there, and that's it. Or we hit her and drag her, and she won't be able to move. Now that is an interesting statement. Why? Because it squarely corroborates what Dr. O'Neill testified to. And you say, well, wait a second, how does him running his mouth corroborate with Dr. O'Neill? Right? Remember, she's the medical examiner in this case. How do we know that he actually executed his plan? He's not just running his mouth. Well, here's how you know. Because Dr. O'Neill testified that there were 3 significant injuries here that caused death, each in and of themselves sufficient to cause death. Meaning, he hit her in the head with what she described as a heavy instrument, right? This was blunt force trauma. It caused a crush injury to her head, a skull fracture that led to brain swelling, and it incapacitated her. And what did she say? It caused her to vomit. What did they, when they found Tanya's body, what was lying underneath her face? Vomit. He hit her in the head so hard that it incapacitated her. It was the result of blunt force trauma. So now we know, based on the statements that he provided, coupled with Linda's testimony, Dr. O'Neill's testimony, now we know the sequence of the blows, right? Now we know the sequence. So in other words, he didn't slice her neck and then hit her in the head. No. This was an orchestrated plan. We know that he was saying this several hours before he killed her. He had a plan in effect, and he carried it out. He hit her in the head with a heavy object, which incapacitated her. She probably fell on the ground, and then he gets behind her and slices her neck, not once, but twice. And what did Dr. O'Neill say? She said that the wounds were so deep that they came very, very close to her spinal cord. Now, I'm not going to show you those photos. I'm not going to show you those awful photos. They're in evidence, and you can take them back and look at them in deliberations if you want. I'm not going to make you look at them again. But I'm sure you remember that testimony. And again, all of these wounds were done with such force that they were able to cause death in and of themselves. This also suggests 2 different weapons, right? 2 different weapons were used. The hilt of a knife is not heavy enough to cause this crush injury. The hilt of a knife is not sufficient enough to do that. That means he had 2 weapons. What does that tell you about his plan? What does that tell you about his intent? He armed himself ahead of time, not with 1 weapon, but with 2. This is not a bar fight, ladies and gentlemen. This was a carefully thought out plan to execute Tanya Wise, to make sure that his wife wouldn't find out about his own son in her womb. August 24th, 2018. How do we know that it wasn't Eric Alvarado? Holy cow. Let's take a look. He's taking steps to conceal these crimes. The defendant, and since she disappears like that for a couple of days, remember, he said the same thing the day before, right? This is part of his plan. No one is going to be looking for her. That's what he says. No one's going to be looking for her. No one cares about Tanya. That's what he said. No one cares about her. I already took 2 baths when I got to her house. I bathed. This morning I bathed. I cleaned my hands with the cleaner, the one for the brakes. So we know, based on Dr. O'Neill's testimony, that this would have been an extremely bloody crime scene. And what is he doing? Again, he is carrying out his plan to make sure that he gets away with this. He doesn't want to be caught. Who would? He's trying to get away with this. So what's he do? He not only is he showering as anybody would, he had to have been a bloody wreck when he got home. But what's he doing? He's cleaning his hands not just with palm olive. He's cleaning his hands with brake cleaner. And then he goes on and says, because I had gloves and everything just in case. Right? So not only did he think about this plan, not only did he bring her out to an isolated area away from everybody, not only did he arm himself with not one but with 2 weapons, not only did he do that, but he had gloves and everything just in case. This was not a spur-of-the-moment homicide. And remember Detective Newman's testimony from yesterday. Again, another one of those witnesses. He came up, he's about 5 minutes long. Remember what he said? He said, listen, we executed a search warrant at the defendant's home and it had no evidence that he committed any of these crimes. It had no evidence. There were no bloody clothes. There was no bloody knife. There was nothing. Right? There was nothing. So we know that part of his plan, he was successful in that endeavor. Right? He was able to conceal part of the evidence from law enforcement. He was able to do that. He did do that. And then, of course, you turn your attention to what he says to Eric Alvarado, which is the confession to this case. Right? This is the confession. We have all the statements leading up, and then the day after the homicide, on August 24th, he then tells Eric Alvarado this. Alvarado asks him, did you see blood? Did you see it? So let's stop right there. What does that infer? What does that infer? Alvarado is asking him a question about blood. That means Alvarado wasn't there, right? If Alvarado was there, he would have known what a bloody mess it had to have been. He's asking him, did you see blood? Alvarado wasn't there. You can say all you want about Eric Alvarado. He wasn't there at the crime scene. And of course, the defendant's response was, look, I had it all over the clothes. Which is true, which had to have been true. You saw those wounds in her neck. You saw that crush injury to her head. It had to have been true. I had it all over the clothes. But without the evidence, they can't do nothing. They can't do nothing if they don't have all the evidence. No one saw the bag. It would have been really nice to find that bag, wouldn't it? It would have been nice to find that bag. But that part of his plan was successful. And we know that he was covered in blood. He got some right there, and he got some on the passenger side headrest. Ladies and gentlemen, this defendant is guilty as charged. There is no question that he is the man who is responsible for the death of Tanya and Josiah. We have him saying that he believed that he would lose everything if his wife found out that Tanya was pregnant with his child. He began planning these crimes several days in advance while he was being recorded in a truck, and then executed that plan. And the geolocations of both of these cell phones, put them together at the appropriate place and at the appropriate time of these homicides. The defendant then described Tanya's blood on his clothes to Eric Alvarado, which was also recorded the day after the homicide. Ladies and gentlemen, there is no question that this defendant is guilty. He is guilty as charged of first-degree murder for Tanya Wise. He is guilty as charged for first-degree murder of his own unborn child. Thank you.